Hi, I'm Jonathan Weinberg, and this is Drawing with Fountain Pens, where you don't have to be an artist, but you have to at least like fountain pens to get something out of this channel.
What?
Is this yours? Your pen?
Yeah, that's my pen. Why?
No, it's a nice pen. I just didn't know it was. I thought it was yours. I didn't want it to get lost.
Well, thank you.
Today I'm going to be talking about the Ineo pen from Pelikan. I think it's a very nice looking pen. Originally, Pelikan came out with this pen as a ballpoint pen, and it won a Red Dot Award for design, and now they've introduced, I think in the last 6 months, the fountain pen version of this pen. It's quite affordable, in the $30 range. However, it only uses cartridges, or only designed to use cartridges. One of the nice things about the pen is actually the box that it comes in. I was very impressed by this. So here it is in the box with the logo, and you can see that actually the box is kind of designed for the original ballpoint pen. I just noticed that, but nevertheless, here it is with the fountain pen in it. And it's very elegant metal box. It kind of reminds me of some of the Kaweco boxes, and it holds the pen quite securely. So that's a nice element for a pen that is relatively affordable. Now, when the pen won the award from the Red Dot people, they talked about its purist minimalist style, and they also talked about its clipless design. You can see that it doesn't have a clip. Pelikan in its own ad copy takes up similar themes. It says the main characteristic is its simple, reduced shape design, calm, harmonious colors, and a high quality processing of natural materials. And then they said, for precisely this reason, we have deliberately dispensed with the clip on the Ineo, which usually tempts people to play around. So the concentration remains with the essential, the thoughts that are to be put on paper. Also, with the colors, we have oriented ourselves to the essential elements of nature. So they insist that the different colors that it comes in, like this kind of bright anodized red, somehow relates to nature, which I find a little strange. To me, this whole emphasis on minimalism that you hear a lot, and about minimalist design, always evokes Mies van der Rohe's, the Bauhaus architect, famous dictum, less is more. But it also suggests a connection to an art movement of the 1960s and 70s called minimalism, in which artists like Tony Smith, Frank Stella, and Donald Judd not only use simplified forms, their work often used industrial processes that suggested the look of commercially manufactured products. So, for example, they would use masking tape and paint, even spray paint, so that they would get the finish, a kind of industrial finish, rather than a handmade look. And Donald Judd in particular talked about how he would design a sculpture and literally order it on the phone and have it manufactured right in a metal shop rather than make it himself. So the whole look of industrial design is very important to minimalist art, and which is interesting because you have literal industrial design taking on that look as well, sort of celebrating the fact that something is made by a machine. So a pen like this makes isn't trying to look handmade in its metal, shiny metal surface, in its very austere but clean lines. It seems to be something that a machine made rather than somebody who handcrafted or even put it together by hand. To make the point, here's a good comparison between the Ineo pen. After all, this is a relatively inexpensive pen, but I'm comparing it here with an Italian pen, Leonardo Momento Zero. This is with the primary manipulation of Jonathan Brooks. That's the resin that he's using here. The resin itself was handmade or poured and created by Jonathan Brooks, and then that was bought and then put on a lathe and hand carved, really, to be this. I mean, or uses a machine, but still somebody had to hand make this pen in a sense. It wasn't all done with a robot, and it has all this ornament and fine work. And of course, it's very expensive to do that. Here, you have a pen that is all done by machine for the most part. Now, there are a lot of times you see pens in Chinese pens that imitate the look of a Leonardo pen, right? They may be made in a factory and even molded in ways and not used any of the handiwork, but they're trying to look like this. In the case of the Pelikan pen, there's no attempt to make this look like it's done by hand, right? It's celebrating the industrial element of the pen, while the expensiveness of the Leonardo pen is all based on the idea that there's a certain amount of handwork in it and ornament, and it has a kind of feel or quality that emulates almost or evokes an older time, right? It's not trying to look contemporary in the same way that the Pelikan pen is trying to look new and modern and sleek and industrial. But I think the other side of this is, when we talk about minimalism, is that in the art world, in the 60s particularly, there was a way in which paintings that were a single color or a sculpture that looked like a cube or a box and employed industrial materials was seen in contrast to complex kind of paintings that you see in a museum of images, or even, let's say, the busyness of a Jackson Pollock abstraction, so that in contrast they seem expressive in their very simplicity. The thing is, in the pen world, where pens themselves are so simple, something minimalist design can seem like no design at all, or perhaps just a bit boring. Arguably, the most traditional pens, like Pelikan's M800, is not that, complex a design. Now, obviously, it has ornament, right, bands, and it has a clip, but it's not like a wild design. It's not a busy design, and it actually has a kind of elegant simplicity to it as well. So, minimalism is always something that you have to think of as being in relationship to something else. And in a certain way, if one's talking about a Mont Blanc 149 or even a Bic pen or a Sharpie, we're not talking about a very, very busy object. And so that's something to think about when you're thinking in terms of minimalist design in the pen world. Or in the other sense, there's nothing more minimal than a pencil, right? So there's a kind of simplicity that's built into the language of pens, right? It's interesting in this aspect. Now, the name Ineo is actually derived from Latin, and it means begin or begin anew. And I think Pelikan very much wanted to signal a fresh start. Certainly the pen looks different from the kinds of pens that the Pelikan is most known for, most famous for. And this is, as people who watch my channel know, the M800, which is my favorite writing pen. It's really my favorite pen. So even though I've been hard on some of Pelikan's pens, I always say that I feel like they make the most beautiful pen, the most beautiful writing pen. And this is a pen, of course, that is meant to sell for $30 to $40, the Ineo, versus a pen that can cost you $500, $600, depending on where you get it new. So that's something to keep in mind. Anyway, I think Pelikan has been for years trying to find a design language and a kind of pen design on the lower end that would compete with, let's say, the Lamy Safari, right? Which is so famous and so popular. This is the AL version, the metal version of the pen, which goes for a similar price, $30, and also has this kind of bright anodized surface and is brightly colored. It does have a clip, but nevertheless, I think this is always the competition. And I think Pelikan has been trying too hard over the last few years or last decade to come up with a pen that really doesn't seems or is as popular and as beautifully designed as something like Lamy has been able to do. And I think almost they've been trying too hard, with some of their pens. I have done reviews of them. For example, here's the Pura, which is a much more expensive pen. And it's nice looking, but it's a little fussy, right? It doesn't have sort of the, the Safari is both classic and looks different. And it's a extraordinary design that has really stood out in the pen world. And it is such a favorite. I don't think Pelikan has hit a home run like that. And I don't think they've done that here yet. But I think this is the first modern design that I feel that Pelikan has done where it really is elegant and simple and doesn't look like they're trying too hard. Kudos for that. Now, one thing that they're claiming is this idea somehow that having a cap with a clip is going to distract you when you write. This is in their copy, and I find that to be a very peculiar idea. I mean, I personally don't spend a lot of time playing with the clip of my pen, and it doesn't distract me when I write. I don't even quite understand how that would work. But if you think about the culture of Pelikan and their design issues, you could see how in the designing part, the clip is almost like a distraction or obsession, because over the years, Pelikan has tried to make their clips somehow relate to the beak of the pelican, right, their mascot. And you can see that again on the Pura, that even though they've changed the clip design from the sort of classic one on the Souverain line, I mean, they've taken this clip, which does look like a pelican's beak, and they've simplified it, and they still kind of make it look beak-like, right? But in the case of the Ineo, they've gotten rid of the clip entirely. But subtly, to me, it still has a little bit of the look of, well, I don't know, a beak, but a little bit of the profile of a nose, right, or of a beak. And the whole shape there's something about it that is subtly bird-like. So I think it's still built into the pen, but of course this isn't going to clip on your shirt. And a lot of people, of course, associate clipping a pen on your shirt to nerds, that it's not a cool thing to do anyway. What is nice about the way this is designed in this cutout is that it stops the pen from rolling off the table. So, the clip serves a double function. It keeps the pen from rolling as well as clips to your shirt. This at least keeps the pen from rolling. That said, in terms of the design, I think there is a big problem because one would think that a pen like this would post, but it doesn't. And I like pens that post. This pen is a particularly thin pen. It comes to this, it has this black section, which is pretty nice. Isn't too slippery. People who watch my channel know that I'm always worried about slipperiness. it has a kind of, it feels actually like it's made of plastic. The pen body is metal, but this feels like plastic. But for whatever reason, it's pleasant, but it gets quite narrow. And I feel it's a bit too narrow, and it feels a little bit too small for me. I have big hands, so I always like pens to post, because also I don't want to lose the cap, but in this case it doesn't post. Now, why would that be? Why would that be? I think it's because they don't want you to scratch the beautiful anodized surface, and they would have to design the cap in such a way that it wouldn't scratch. And more expensive pens, like the Lamy Aeon, does have a cap designed in such a way not to scratch that surface. The Caris Caris Decograph also, I think, is designed in such a way so that the anodized surface is not scratched. But in this case, they just don't want you to post it. The other negative of this pen, I think it does look very nice, but I would say the other negative of the pen, and it's a big one, is that it only takes cartridges. If you open it up, you can see it has a big cartridge in it, but there's no particular reason why it should be designed that way. It has plenty of, if they wanted to, there'd be plenty of room here for a converter, but they have created it so narrow, and it has a very subtle shape to the barrel so that it tapers down ever so slightly, and in the interior it keeps you from putting a converter in there. There's not enough room for the converter in terms of the width of the pen. It also forces the cartridge to stay put and in place and press up against the nib the way it's designed. That reminds me of the Schaefer student pen does that, which also doesn't allow you to put a converter in here. I mean, that might be the reasoning behind it. There is one converter that I found that will fit, which is a Kaweco, one of their mini converters that's meant for the sports pen, but only holds a tiny amount of ink, and it's kind of hard to use, so I wouldn't recommend that. So that's a big deal, because many of the pens that this pen competes with, like the Lamy Safari, or so here's the Lamy Safari, or even cheaper and more similar in terms of it looking, the Muji fountain pen, which is a great bargain. I think it's under $20. Often it's out of stock, but I think that's very similar pen. Do use a converter. And then another pen, which I think is very close to this pen, which is the Pilot Explorer. And that, too, uses a converter. And I think for a lot of people, the failure to be able to use a converter makes they're not going to want to buy this pen. Another nice thing is the way in which they've kind of abstracted on the finial the famous Pelikan logo, and then written on the side just Pelikan. In terms of weight, it's not a super heavy pen. It's 24 grams. As a point of comparison, let's look at the Safari. It's 21 grams, even though it's a slightly bigger pen, and also metal. So it's right in there. Here's the Pilot Explorer, and it is lighter, 17 grams. No, it's not a super heavy pen, and the fact that it doesn't post means that that makes it even lighter. So if you're actually, when you're writing it with it, we're talking about around 18 grams. In terms of size, the pen is 5.5 inches, which is very similar in size to the Lamy Safari and the Pilot Explorer. However, when you open these pens and post them, they get quite large. in a good way, I think. And this pen, because it can't post, stays quite small. In fact, it is just 5 inches when it is open versus 6.5 inches when the Safari is posted and around 6 inches when the Explorer is open. A little more than 6 inches. So to me that is a problem with the pen. I would rather it post, but a lot of people don't mind that. It's interesting that the Muji pen, which is such a bargain and people love, does post. So it gets quite large also. There's another pen that it reminds me of that is quite affordable, which is the Jinhao N35, which does have a clip and is very simple. It's not the best made pen, I have to say, but it's very inexpensive, less than $10 on Amazon. And it too posts securely. So that's another one of the pens that it competes with that posts just fine. One thing I do like about the pen is that it has the traditional shape fountain pen nib, kind of, I think, a number 5 nib. A lot of the pens that are in this price range have nibs that are similar to the Lamy Safari and are sort of proprietary nibs. And I like the fact that this is a traditional nib, and you can, in fact, if you get a Guleb Jovo nib, you could switch it if you don't like the Pelikan nib. You can switch this nib out. Or if you do like Pelikan nibs, because I actually think their inexpensive nibs are quite good, you can take this nib and put it on a different pen. And that isn't going to work with the kinds of pens that have the proprietary nibs. So that's a great thing about the pen. So I am going to write with the pen and try that out, and then I'm going to do a quick drawing of some purple tulips. Tulips have been great this year. If you find that this YouTube video has been useful, please subscribe. That's the way to support the channel. So how does it write? Pelikan Ineos, or Neos. This is a Pelikan blue cartridge that comes with a pen. This is Rhodia paper. Now, I would say that the nib is nice. It has a bit of feedback. It has a little bit of variation, actually. I mean, when push it, it's not quite a nail. It's not super wet. It could be a little wetter. It's pretty good. I think it writes nicely. But it could be a little smoother. It certainly doesn't write like an expensive Pelikan pen. In terms of my comfort, the pen is too narrow, but it's not, horrible to hold, like I've said about the Pelikan Jazz. If you have small hands, I think you'd like it better. I prefer it if it posted, and I would prefer it if it used a converter.